Welcome to the Creepin Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow us on Twitter at Creepin_it and like us on Facebook at The Creepin Real Show. Do you have a paranormal story you'd like to share with us? You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com.
Welcome to the Creepin Real Show. Today, I hope you guys aren't having any snacks or pizza or anything that might cause you to never want to eat it again. This is your host, Christy. I'm the main host for this week. And with me is, over in SoCal, is Moni. How are you doing?
I am well, and I'm laughing because it's grocery day, and so I'm eating, and I have a cold, so I'm eating cold medicine and barbecue chips for breakfast. It's 8 o'clock here in the morning, and you're saying you're hoping that we're not eating anything that's going to put us off. So I guess there's worse things than being put off potato chips from a health perspective, but we'll see.
Yes, exactly. Yardley down south in the ATL, how are you doing?
Everything's good. Can't complain. Labor Day weekend, a lot of things going on in Atlanta, and that's why I've been at the house.
Well, everybody who is listening down south, I hope you guys make it out of Florida okay. If you are, or any of the other coastal cities, this huge hurricane that just got upgraded to a Cat 5 is barreling down the coast of the east coast of the United States. So I hope you guys are doing okay. I'm assuming by now, by the time you've listened to this, it's already happened, but we are definitely thinking of you, and especially the Bahamas. They're about to get hit, and it's not going to be pretty. So, so much for, this isn't going to be a very big hurricane that we kept getting the reports of. So with that, I will tell you that we are going to cover crazy autopsy stories today, and I've always known that I'm a little fucked up as far as like what I can take on the gross factor scale. But I really did learn my complete decompartmentalization when I'm reading these stories. I was eating flank steak and just going to town, eating some of the grossest stories, or reading and watching some of the grossest stories I've ever personally been exposed to. So I have learned a little bit about myself doing some research on these stories. Initially, when I started to do the research for this episode, I was going for broke as far as just what are the grossest stories out there. People who have gone on message boards and told stories of just, they're usually like pathologists or did a stent when they were trying to get their PhD or whatever, or they were EMT workers. But I mean, if you read one, you've read them all. They're all horribly disgusting, and I just didn't want it to be just about that. So I decided to make it more about mysteries that were solved, or the autopsy created a mystery that ended up being solved, more of the interest of the true crime instead of just the nasty bodies exploding, brains turning to mush type stories I was reading. So with that,
I mean, it wouldn't be creeping if we didn't do a little bit of both. So
yes, and I do have some pulled up if we have extra time at the end. I did think, okay, I have these in the queue, so if we want to end the show with some of these disgusting comments, they're not on our doc, but because I didn't want to put y'all through what I read if we didn't get to it, because it's there's some really, like, it makes me not want to die. Like, I'm just going to make my body animate forever because I don't want that to happen to me. I'm like, oh no. So anyway, with that, also I see you're talking about Gypsy Rose, Moni, but I would also like you to talk a little bit about what your library is doing, and it's making some pretty good not necessarily all over the nation news, but it's getting on the news, and I'm really proud of you. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that.
Thank you. So Chula Vista, the city of Chula Vista, through the library, is hosting a drag queen story time. Not to be confused with Drag Queen Story Hour, which is a wonderful organization, but they are trademarked. We're doing a story time. And basically, we have invited 2 performers to come in and read stories to kids. And there's going to be a craft component, and there's going to be music, live music going on in the background. It's going to be super duper fun. As much fun as that may sound, it's about, and the books are actually, we've already vetted the books. They're about inclusion and loving yourself. Super cute. Unfortunately, some actual domestic terrorist groups have gotten a hold of this information and used it to their advantage to have rallies and protests in front of our library buildings. And because of that, we've had very popular demand from supporters of this event. And so we are expecting hundreds of people. And what first was going to be in a tiny mall branch is going to be hosted by the same amazing staff from that mall branch, but we've moved it to a bigger location, a comfortable auditorium, a place where children and their families can come in through a door and not have to come in past all the protesters. So we're very excited. It's happening September 10th at 4 p.m., which is a weekday. So if you are in the San Diego area, it has been all over television news, and it's been all over every Facebook group. Everyone has some kind of opinion one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But most of all, and there's been some threats, and there's been a lot of people who are not in this state actually calling to complain about it. So sorry, you don't vote here. You don't get to have a say.
Exactly.
But our mayor, our city council have been extremely supportive. So kudos to Chula Vista. We are a Pride city. This is not just a library event. This is a city event. And South Bay Pride and South Bay Alliance are both our partners in this, and they will have a table for anyone who needs resources. And we're very excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. I mean, I am not a drag queen, but I appreciate people that want to educate on the differences and what makes us different and celebrating them instead of condemning them. So I love that y'all are doing that. And it makes me laugh when I read. I mean, I because this fascinates me so much, and I get my feathers ruffled when I hear people being so ignorant about, differences of how you dress or whatever. Makeup and wigs were actually invented for men hundreds of years ago, or thousands of years ago. I mean,
comedians, Shakespearean actors, everyone's been dressing as women for many years. And some of the protesters, the filthy, disgusting things that they have said, ugh. I don't even know what's in people's minds who think and speak that way, but it's certainly not what's in the minds of the performers. There was an issue, unfortunately. We have vetted our performers. That being said, there was an issue in Houston, Texas, where somebody found out that the performer was a pedophile. That being said, that's horrible. But also, this is a 45-minute event. Staff is going to be present at all times. Parents are going to be present at all times. There's nobody, and just with any other performer, clowns and balloon people.
Read up on Edward Gacy, people, if you have a problem with this.
Going to be right, exactly. Adults are going to be in the room at all times. It's just filthy disgusting, the things that people are imagining or trying to pretend are going to happen or not happen at this event. So just knock that out of your minds and come for a story time, or don't show up. That's okay too.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
That's what's up. Sounds like it's going to be a big event, and I'm happy that a lot of people are supporting it and are going to come out. And you sound very composed, and hopefully everybody keeps their composures and just have a good time, because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're having a good time, and it sounds like it's going to be pretty dope. I've seen a lot of promotion that you've been doing for it, but just the fact that there's a lot of media coverage, that's probably going to be a draw for a lot of people to participate.
Yeah, and thank you to the people who have supported us, because for all the filthy messages and threats that we've received a whole lot of emails and phone calls and social media support. So we really appreciate that. There's a group coming to form a human chain between the protesters and the children. It's just really neat. And Chula Vista PD is very dedicated to coming and make sure everyone is safe. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, this is a new job for you. You just moved your entire family to this new town to become the head librarian of this branch, and you're making some waves. I would expect no less from you, but I am definitely proud of you and the chances that you're taking on literally your first few months of work. You're like, here's
Yeah,
what we're doing.
well, it's funny because that was the first thing is I came to one of the two branches that I manage and I asked the staff, what's something you've thought about doing that you haven't had a chance to? And this was what they identified as what they
Oh,
wanted
that's
to do,
awesome.
what was important to them and their community. And I told them there's going to be some pushback, but if, I'll support you. Let's see if we can do this. And here we are. So I'm so freaking proud of this team. Like
That's awesome.
they're new to me. I'm new to them, but they are amazing.
Wow,
Is story time something that regularly goes on?
We have regular story times with volunteers. We have regular story times with staff. But these are folks who, by the way, these performers are educators in their daily life. Anyone assuming that someone who dresses in drag is inherently gay or transgender, just knock it off.
That's not true. A lot of drag queens are not gay. They're just normal people, probably married, whatever. You have never know.
They're saying, well, you should just have a fireman or a police officer come read. And I'm like, first of all, we do that and you don't show up. So, Second of all, how do you know these aren't firemen or police officers? So get over yourselves.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of interesting.
I don't want to be, we try not to get too political on this show, but this show supports all walks of life. This isn't about politics. This is about supporting and exposing people to tolerance. And a lot of times these people, maybe if they went to the story hour, they would learn a thing or two about the human condition and actually come out going, wow, okay, I met this person. They're pretty awesome. Sometimes these story hours can be better for adults more than kids because kids aren't born having feelings of who's different and to exclude them at times. I mean, some are, but we won't go into that. But anyway, I just wanted to celebrate what you're doing. I wish I could go. I'm due to go to San Diego at some point. My baby nephew's there. I'm going to try to see if they want to go. It would be great if they did. I'm not going to push it. I don't know their views on it, but I'm going to send them the information and be like, it would be great if you showed up to this. But I would love to, at some point, if you do it again, try to make it because I want to go. I mean, I want to go for real.
Yeah.
I'm like, damn.
I think we would like to do it again, especially with all the partners that are helping us with it. So
that's great. Well, anyway, thank you for doing that. And thank you to that city for being so supportive.
Yay. So I have a weird news story related to our podcast. We have done a show about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and the murder of her mother, Dee Dee, who had Munchausen by proxy, if you recall, and had a continually abused Gypsy and made people think that Gypsy was sick when she wasn't. So basically, I saw this headline, Gypsy Rose Blanchard back together with fiancé after briefly calling off engagement. And I'm thinking fiancé, I'm thinking Nick Godejohn, the man who murdered her mother.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, creepy. I actually read it. She's got a new boyfriend. This young lady has a new lease on life. And honestly, after all she's been through, and she's serving her time for having her part in killing her mom. I'm not saying that was right at all. Yes. But after all she's been through, there's some new photos that have come out from her in jail. She's got a really cute haircut. She looks really healthy and strong. And she has a boyfriend who is only identified in the media as Ken, although they have been photographed together. And apparently after the Mommy, Dead, and Dearest documentary on HBO aired, this gentleman, Ken, reached out to her via mail, and they started writing to each other weekly. And eventually, with her phone call allowance, she has been talking to him by phone just about every day for hours a day. I don't know how they have time for that in prison, but I think she's in a pretty minimal security situation. Yeah. So anyway, and then from there, when I posted it, someone reached out to us from a group that I wanted to point out because thank you. There is a group, let me see what it's called, Murder of Dee Dee Discussion, group by Natasha Cooper. It is a closed group, but you can ask for an invite and you'll have to answer a few questions. Tell them the Creepin' It Real show sent you, y'all.
Yes, please.
Yeah, they reached out to us and they were saying that they have regular discussions with Gypsy and Nick, the man who actually killed her mother. And there's just basically some interesting updates. There are actually some conspiracy theories about the murder, which we didn't know about. We might have to do a part 2 on the Gypsy Rose.
Yeah.
Because there's some talk that possibly a third person assisted in the murders. I don't know if I believe that, but I haven't seen the evidence. So just kind of interesting that this story, such a landmark, interesting, different kind of case, still has elements that we don't know all about.
I agree. Whenever I learned about the story, I think it stuck out to me, and again, I still think of it from time to time when I listen to true crime podcasts all the time, and a lot of times I think back to her case. It's just going to be one of those, um, Ted Bundy type cases where it's so different and so many different fractions of mental abuse and, the Munchausen by proxy, and how maybe parents need to think about that shit. when they, if they start on it, if you string your kid along long enough and they don't die from what you're doing, they could turn around and kill your ass to get free. So it's just a fascinating case, and it's a current day case. These things didn't happen that long ago. They're still interacting. They're still in the news. So I wouldn't be against doing a part two, seeing how things play out. And I did comment when they commented on our link that you posted that I would love to interview them, because they were saying they actively talk, and they're like, join the group. And I did. So I'm just kind of waiting and biding my time to see, okay, maybe we could get them to have a non-phone interview, or one of them, but
Yeah, for
would be
sure.
great, because I personally, and I know everybody's views are different on this case, but I personally have a lot of empathy for Gypsy. I don't think she's ever going to be um, mentally sound.
Yeah,
I
she
think
went
there,
through a lot.
yeah, I just don't, I feel for her. And I think, and I hope that her fiance, I don't know when she's getting out of prison, but if she does and they're together, he's going to have to really, it's going to be like parenting somebody. I mean, she's just not ever going to be mentally sound, in my opinion. I don't know how you could be with
Yeah.
that kind of upbringing. So I do feel for her. I don't blame her for killing her mother after everything she
No.
was pushed through. I don't think it was right, but I also don't blame her. Like, I can't blame
Well,
her.
the way it
So
went down, and this isn't a podcast about that again, and
right,
maybe we will have to do a part two. The way it went down, I mean, I don't know who can judge. Like, it's like
right.
I don't blame her for wanting her mother dead and killing her mother. On the other hand, it was sort of brutal the way it all happened. But
Yeah,
anyways,
it's
and
bad. Yeah.
premeditated and so on. So
Wasn't pretty.
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't the right choice, but in the mental capacity she'd been put through her whole life, it doesn't surprise me that she got to that point. So anyway, thanks you. Yeah. Well, anyway. Time to move
Thank
on when
you
I can't
too.
talk.
No, no,
Um,
no.
All
Thank
right.
you.
so
All right. Well,
Yardley, I'm so glad you reminded me of this, because I had been looking forward to it and then completely forgot. So you want to give us an update?
yeah, it came out like a thief in the night. On August 30th, Dark Crystal: The Age of Resistance dropped on Netflix. So I was going to ask both of you, who I know you, both of you are busy. I was going to ask if you're watching, do you plan to watch, and your thoughts. So before I go to both of you and ask you, if you plan on watching the show, I checked it out. I'm going on into the 5th episode,
Mm-hmm.
and I really dig it. And it's
Oh,
way
good.
darker. It's way darker than you would think. All I'm saying is episode 4, and then you'll say, oh
Oh,
wow.
good.
But
Okay.
it's done really well, and their use of CGI or enhancing something in CGI. Um, it's very specialized. Of course, you're not going to get the big landscapes and things like that without there being some digital whatever things done
Right,
to it.
right. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the CGI that they use is kind of for the Skeksis' tongues, because they move in a way that you couldn't do,
Mm-hmm.
as a puppet. But it's not, everything works to me. So it looks great. And I haven't gotten to the end, because this is a prequel to The Dark Crystal. So I think that this is probably going to be a wrap, depending on how it ends. But it's done really great at a lot of character development, of you getting to know what the Gelflings are and all the different types, and the same things with the Skeksis. It's very talk heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
So probably
okay.
the first episode, when you watch it, you're gonna say, well, man, there's a lot of talking, and I don't know how it's gonna hold up with these puppets. But then by the time you get three episodes in, you're totally into the way it looks and how they move, and they do a great job. So I'll say, anybody listening, definitely give it a chance. So do y'all plan on getting in?
My husband and my oldest daughter have watched it. He's home with her when she gets home from school, so I'm not here. But she's enjoying it. My 2-year-old has walked by while it's been on and has said that it's a little creepy for her for the way things look. But I'm really interested. My husband was super excited and actually was like getting our oldest daughter to be like, "Hey, we're gonna watch this thing," and it's from like mommy and daddy used to watch this when they were kids and stuff. So I think they're really enjoying it. She hasn't told me much about it. She just says she wants to watch more of it. So I will be joining them on that, I think.
I'm definitely going to check it out. I've been like counting it down, and my plan was to watch the original before I started, and then it just kind of dropped off my radar. And then you were writing about it, and I'm like, holy crap, you're right. It had dropped, and I completely forgot. So I will definitely be checking that out. I'm excited. Wow. Talk about just an awesome era that we're in where we're seeing so much of our childhood come back
Yeah.
and revisited in an even better way with all the abilities we have, computer wise. So I'm so stoked. Can't wait.
Yeah, and another thing that's good, and this is, and I think Netflix has kind of shown over the last few years, that Netflix has been out, and then now you've got everybody getting into the streaming game. But one of the ways that you're going to have to survive in the streaming services is having original content and a lot of diverse content. And I think the things like this are the things that are going to keep Netflix relevant for quite a while because
especially with Disney Plus coming around. Yep.
yeah, but with Disney Plus though, you're only getting PG and PG-13 rated material, so Netflix is always going to offer stuff that
Yeah.
You're giving us serial killers, Netflix.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So
horror.
Exactly.
I'll totally be loyal to Netflix more than Disney Plus because there's only so much content. Like anything from Disney that I would want to watch on there, I probably already own. So my only interest would be with some of the original stuff like The Mandalorian and things like that. But then will it be enough for me to not cancel it like I do HBO now when Game of Thrones would be off? Because I think I'll be doing that, you know what I mean? But I think Netflix will, I think that they give a lot. They're a lot more diverse with the people they hire. They've got international wares. They got a lot of stuff. So I think you're right, Chrissy. We live in an era where I think that there's something for everyone. But if you were someone who was born in the 70s or the 80s and you did like The Dark Crystal, this is definitely an awesome prequel and that I think is worth your time. And they're all like hour episodes.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited. I'll definitely check it out. And I personally, you know me, I'm not that big on Disney stuff. So for me, Netflix is above and beyond, superior. But I get that everybody is excited about Disney Plus because of all the things they've bought and own now. And, it just all y'all Comic-Con comic peoples and Star Wars peoples and all it just, totally matches all your loves. So I am excited for y'all, but not necessarily something I would jump on and watch. Whereas watching the evolvement of Netflix throughout the decades is crazy. I mean, talk about a company that could have just tanked if they had not kept up with, the changing times and and now are still leading the pack on things. I bow down to whoever does their marketing and business plans because they're killing it.
I have to say I don't know if it's an advantage or a step up. The step up that a lot of these other streaming services has, they're just copying what Netflix is doing.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Disney has the money to where their service is going to have longevity, even if it sucks. It's going to have the legs. They've got the dough to do that. Netflix is constantly going to have to figure out, well, what's the next big thing that they're going to do? They don't rest on their laurels, but.
Well, what surprises me about Disney that they're going to be doing, or they said they're going to be doing, is they're not going to be releasing their shows all at once. They're going to make you wait week to week. So I find that interesting, like how people are going to respond to that. That's the whole point of Netflix and why people gravitate towards it is when they put out a series, they dump it. Like that's it. And people don't move for 70 hours or whatever it is that to get through because people hate the wait, that normal cable gives you. So Disney Plus is going to go with that cable pattern of dropping shows, and I know people are still going to be watching, but there's going to be some disgruntled people like, "What? I got to wait a week?"
I'll spoil.
That's true. Yeah.
I'll spoil. But that's how you get that. But that's how you keep, the same thing
It's
with,
true.
HBO and all of these things. That's
Yeah.
how you keep people subscribed for at least a couple of months. You know,
Hmm. It's
you know what
true.
I'm
Whereas
saying?
Netflix is constantly having to find good shows to drop because they drop them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Some
uh,
of them land.
Well, I have a couple of shows I wanted to recommend movies. One of them is the second season of Mindhunter is far beyond superior than the first season. It was awesome. Oh, it really was good. And their bigger case in that episode is the the Atlanta child murderers,
Yes.
and them catching the killer. And of course they've inserted the main mine hunter, and I don't know if that's true or not, if they really were working behind the scenes or if this is just their way of tackling that case. But it was really good. I enjoyed it. The first one I got through and it was decent, but this one is far and beyond better. And you don't necessarily have to watch the whole season of the first one. There's a few things you'll miss, but they're easily caught up in the first few episodes of what you can tell. Okay, this is clearly what happened in the last, because I'd kind of forgotten. And then I was watching it and I was like, okay, good. I don't need to go back. They've covered kind of how things happened, ended in the first season. So definitely check it out if you're really into that 70s, 80s vibe, and how the entire FBI profiling section got underway. It's pretty fascinating, and the girl in this season is a huge standout. She's just getting more awesome as the shows go. So definitely recommended. And then I have been trying to find Midsummer by Ari Aster, the guy who did Hereditary,
Yeah.
for months, but it hasn't been available. It's still barely available. I caught a shitty version of it on a really random app I have this weekend and watched it. It is different than what I thought it was going to be, but
Okay.
it's fucked up. It's not as fucked up as Hereditary. It
Okay.
doesn't have the other world spiritual piece of it like Hereditary did, but
Okay.
it does have really weird, crazy. I recommend it. It's worth the watch. I'm just giving you kind of don't expect the spiritual aspect that Hereditary had. So it was good. It was different. I kept trying to guess what was going to happen next, and some of it I got right, some of it I got way wrong. So definitely worth a watch if it ever comes out. It's been forever, so I don't know why they're keeping it so under wraps and making it so difficult. Maybe that's why, because I've been like hunting for it for months. So definitely check that one out too.
Okay.
So with that,
Interesting.
we will get into our 3 crazy autopsy stories as far as how the autopsy changed the course of these investigations or deaths of people. Our last one is a little bit long, but it was such an absolutely fascinating story. I could have made it 3 times as long as it was, so I did cut out a ton of details. But if you ever want to look it up, I actually read a Vanity Fair article about that story that it was really good. So with that, we're going to start off with Robert Curley.
All right. The painful death of Robert Curley, Hershey, Pennsylvania, in September 1981.
91.
And Robert, what? Oh,
Sorry.
91. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Robert Curley is brought to the ER with some odd symptoms. He's got what seems like the flu. He has acute pain in his palms and the soles of his feet. His hair is falling out, and he has started to vomit. It would take investigators years to work out exactly what happened to Robert. They knew he'd been poisoned with thallium, which was used as rat poison for many years, but still has use in university labs like the one he worked in as an electrician. Initially, they thought it might be a prank gone wrong by someone in his work. Test on his wife knew what? Test on his
That's my fault.
wife,
New
his
wife.
new wife,
Yeah, sorry.
Joanne Curley, and their 4-year-old daughter also picked up traces of thallium. In seeking the source of the lethal dose of thallium in Curley's body, investigators began with a chemical laboratory at Wilkes University, where Robert had worked on a construction project earlier that year. The lab contained 5 bottles of thallium. Investigators from the Federal Occupational Health and Safety Administration inventoried the chemicals at the lab and determined that none were missing. OSHA also tested 13 of Robert Curley's coworkers and concluded that none, suffered from thallium poisoning. Investigators eventually found that a 1-quart cooler Robert took to work each day had traces of thallium in it. In December 1991, police declared the death a homicide. The investigation bogged down for almost 3 years. In August 1994, the police exhumed Curley's body for a second autopsy, which was performed by 2 forensic experts, Michael Baden and Frederick Reeders. Both have testified in the O.J. Simpson trials and have worked in numerous other high-profile cases. Specifically, Baden and Reeders had an interest in Robert Curley's shaggy hair.
Hair is, for many things, a timeline, said Reeders, the National Director of Medical Services, Inc. in Willow Grove, and a former Philadelphia Assistant Medical Examiner. It is a repository of what's circulated in the body. If you take an aspirin, what will grow out of your head will be a strand of hair on which a tiny portion will have a little aspirin. Since hair grows at an approximate rate of 1/3 to half an inch per month, Reeders said scientists can start at the hair's root and work backward in time. Using highly sophisticated equipment, the test pinpointed at least 7 separate occasions during the last 11 months of his life that Robert Curley ingested thallium. The largest dose, police say, was taken while he was in his hospital bed at the Hershey Medical Center. Police say Joanne Curley was the only person with constant and frequent access to the victim and the food and drink consumed by the victim. The police case suggests that Robert Curley discovered he was being poisoned in the days before he died. A registered nurse at the Hershey Medical Center told police that Robert Curley grabbed her by the arm the day before he went into a coma and said, "Please help me. My wife is trying to kill me. She is not as she seems." Curley family statement. Bob Curley was just 32 years old when he was killed by his wife. She began to poison him just six weeks after they were married. She did this over an 11-month period of time and watched him suffer with excruciating pain. Joanne Curley got away with this for 5 years until her arrest in 1996. She agreed to plead guilty to third-degree murder, and she gave details to how, why, when, and where she did this horrible act of murder. She confessed that she was greedy and wanted his insurance money of $300,000, which she did receive and spent. And then December 12, 2016, Joanne is released from prison. During her 20-year stint in prison, Joanne Curley applied for parole 8 times, and every single time the state denied parole, in large part because Robert Curley's siblings and his mother, who died last year, demanded the woman serve her entire term. So also a little bit of extra on here. She also killed her first husband.
Black Widow.
Yes, I didn't put that in there because honestly, it should be a whole other case. But she sues, and the whole reason why they ended up digging up his body is she decided to sue the hospital that he worked at and accused them of poisoning him. So she was the person of her own demise. She got so greedy and was so confident that they couldn't trace it back to her that he was buried. This was done until she turned around and sued the hospital, and that caused them to investigate even more. I mean, they were already kind of investigating it, but it was a little bit of a cold case, and they weren't putting too much attention to it until she sued the hospital. And like the day after he died, she had gotten a $1 million settlement from her first husband's death, which they found out she had killed him as well later. So she's just a majorly greedy bitch.
Wow.
And she
all that.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that's what being an ex-girl will get you.
Exactly. And that she had started poisoning him like 2 months after they got married. That's why I put their wedding photo in there. They had only been married a year when he died. So She would point on that one from the very beginning. Oh, Yardley, so you're going to read the story, half of it, and I purposely didn't put you in there to read this one, but, well, you're going to know why I'm apologizing once you start reading it.
All right. Okay. Well, the murder trial of Cindy Gladue. In an unprecedented decision, a preserved part of the victim's body was brought into court to show jurors the wound that caused her to bleed to death. An unprecedented decision by prosecutors to submit a victim's preserved tissue as evidence in a recent Edmonton murder trial has drawn criticism for both ethical and legal reasons. During the first-degree murder trial of Brad Barton, the preserved vagina of victim Cindy Gladue was brought into the court for experts to show jurors the details of the 11-centimeter wound that caused her to bleed to death in Barton's Yellowhead Inn bathtub. The trial hinged on whether the wound was caused by Barton's fingers during sex, as he claimed, or a sharp weapon, as the prosecutors argued. It was the first time human tissue has been accepted as evidence in a Canadian courtroom. Acting Chief Medical Examiner Graham Dowling told court the decision was necessary to educate the jury on the wound because autopsy pictures fell short. The photographs, to me, as a pathologist, don't portray the nature of the injury as accurately as the physical specimen itself, he told court. We tried to do the best we could with photographs, but they don't tell the whole story. They're a bit dark. So Dowling rolled up his sleeve, snapped on a pair of latex gloves, and demonstrated his testimony with Gladue's tissue. Later, a defense expert also used the tissue. The vagina was placed on a projector, and jurors watched on a 3-meter screen at the front of the courtroom. Defense lawyers Dino Batos and Evan McIntyre argued against the inclusion of Gladue's vagina because any evidentiary value would be overwhelmed by the extreme prejudicial effect of such grisly evidence on Barton's right to a fair trial. I can't think of anything more prejudicial than a body part 5 feet from the jury, McIntyre argued. What is next? Do we bring a corpse into the courtroom? Yeah, this is pretty. I guess so. This is pretty.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy.
Well, prosecutor, I'll believe you. I'll take your word for it. Just don't bring a dead vagina into the courtroom. Okay?
Well, first of all, we knows who really wants to win.
Yeah.
No
you know what I mean? But wow, that's. I know. Well, I was trying. I was trying not to laugh through the whole thing, but that last that the end got.
That's why I was like, when I was putting who. Okay, I start with me, blah blah, read blah blah next, and then when I go to your turn and I look at what the story is, I was like, oh, Yardley's gonna kill me.
I couldn't like look. The vagina was placed on a projector. That was it for me.
God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Cindy. I'm sorry that we're laughing about this. She's probably like, bitch, wait, what if it was your vagina laying there on a projector?
Yeah, I feel like she was more mad when that happened than anything. So, Crown Prosecutor Carol Godfrey pushed for the tissue to be admitted. The injury is the clear issue here, she said. This can be done in absolute good taste, almost like a biology class, right? Because kids are always so mature during biology class. Yeah. We have to have the same faith and trust in our jurors on how to deal with this and in our podcasters and not giggling about it.
We're the worst offenders, probably.
Know, right? That's what they are here for. The legal arguments were under a publication ban for the duration of the trial. The Court of Queen's Bench Justice Robert Grassier decided the potential for prejudice was speculative and allowed the jury to view Glandue's tissue. I was kind of bracing myself, but it had a much milder effect on me than I thought it would. Frankly, the autopsy room photos were tougher for me to look at than this clinical work. We're not trying to shield the jury from anything here. Shannon Prithipal, president of the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association, said the legal move reminded her of a visit to the museum at a former Auschwitz concentration camp. There, human body parts are not allowed to be photographed to preserve the victim's dignity. I think this was demeaning to Cindy Gladue. I feel like that too. I don't see that having a piece of body tissue in court helps the jury reach a decision or an expert to help state their opinion. The inclusion of the tissue may have been a miscalculation by the prosecution, Prithipal pointed out, because Barton was later acquitted. Ah, shit, all that for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
University of Alberta law professor Peter Sankoff said it's I was like Skankoff, and it says it's unlikely the case will be set a precedent many other prosecutors will follow because they must prove it necessary to the case. In most cases, courts are going to be very wary of admitting human tissue. The idea that Crown prosecutors will start to do this willy-nilly is speculative. It's like some CSI level shit, y'all.
Yeah. And then, so after putting the story together, I kind of did a quick search to see what else is going on with the case. And there's all kind of groups. This is in Canada, of course, so we're not seeing much of this on the news, but they are pushing for retrial, which I don't know if you can do that in Canada since he got acquitted. I don't know. I don't know what their laws are like versus ours, but everybody's screaming and pushing for a retrial, and they feel like this actually hurt the case, and possibly if they had just heard from experts on the explanation, like what their minds think is probably worse than what they actually saw with their eyeballs, I guess, is kind of what they're pushing for. So anyway, I don't know how you get a retrial on that, but they're definitely pushing for it. So I mean, if he did do it, then I hope they get justice for her because she definitely deserves it. I just find that, yeah, it probably made a little bit of a media circus out of the situation instead of doing what it was meant to do. So, all right, here's my favorite case. It's called The Body in Room 348. The corpse at the Elegante, I'm assuming is how you're supposed to say that. Elegante Hotel stymied the Beaumont, Texas police. They could find no motive for the killing of popular oil and gas man Greg Flanagan, and no explanation for how he had received his strange internal injuries. Bent on tracking down his killer, Flanagan's widow Susie turned to a private investigator, Ken Brannon. Greg Flanagan traveled light and lived tidy. After so many years on the road, he would leave his rolling suitcase open on the floor of his hotel room and use it as a drawer. Really quick, I wish I was really, really tempted to take this story out and make it its own show because it's so interesting. And after doing so much research on the story, like each individual person of this story is so... there's total and fascinating in their own right, and I didn't get to include a lot of that, but if you are ever interested in finding more or reading a real big profile of it, the stories and each individual person are super interesting in their own right. So definitely recommend, if you're really interested in true crime, looking up this story. It's really crazy how this thing played out.
Interesting.
Most evenings, he never left the room. He would crank up the air conditioner because he liked a cool room at night and sit on the bed, leaning back on two pillows propped against the headboard. Considerately to avoid soiling the bedspread, he would lay out a clean white hand towel on which he placed his ashtray, cigarette pack, lighter, BlackBerry, and the TV remote, and a candy bar. He smoked and broke off candy bits while watching TV. This is where Greg was on the evening of Wednesday, September 15th, 2010, in room 348 of the MGM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. Lounging, smoking, snacking on a Reese's Crispy Crunchy bar, sipping root beer, and watching Iron Man 2. He missed the ending. That Wednesday night, watching his movie, Greg got an email from his wife, Susie, shortly after 7. Susie was using a computer program to file for a tax extension. After she reported her progress, he wrote back, "You're doing good, babe." At some point during the loud computer-generated showdown at the end of the film, amid all the fake violence, Craig was struck from nowhere with a very real and shattering blow. A blow so violent it would blind a man with pain. He managed to get off the bed and move towards the door before he fell, legs splayed and face first. He was probably dead by the time his face hit the green rug.
After several attempts to get a hold of her husband, Susie got the hotel manager to open up his hotel room. Their alarmed calls brought an ambulance and the Beaumont police. They found a middle-aged man dead on the rug, prone and doubled over, a single cigarette cupped delicately between two stiff fingers of his left hand. That blow must have been a beast. The fact that your cigarette, you know what I'm saying, is
Still
still
in
in
your
your
They hit
hand.
him with,
Yeah.
Room 348 was stuffy and exceptionally warm. The man's skin color had gone grayish blue. There was a wet spot at the crotch of his blue pajamas, but that wasn't unusual. At the hotel, the detective Scott Apple and the rest of the police saw the death as routine, most likely natural causes. A photographer snapped pictures to make a record of the scene, and the body was driven by a transport service to the Jefferson County medical examiner for an autopsy. The only mystery here appeared to be medical, and it was likely a minor mystery at that. The circumstances of Greg Flanken's death, as reported, were unremarkable. On the table before Dr. Tommy Brown was a 55-year-old Caucasian male who appeared to be in decent shape. After methodical inspection, the only marks Brown found on the body were a 1-inch abrasion on his left cheek where his face had hit the rug, and, curiously, half-inch laceration of his scrotum. This was interesting. The sac itself was swollen and discolored, and around the wound was a small amount of edema fluid. The bruising had spread up through the groin area and across the right hip. Something had hit him hard. The story his body told grew more intriguing. When Brown opened the front of the torso, he discovered a surprising amount of blood and extensive internal damage. A certain amount of partly digested food had been torn from his intestines. The doctor found small lacerations there, and on the stomach and liver, as well as broken ribs and a hole in his right atrium of his heart. The condition of his insides reflected severe trauma. Flanken had been beaten to death or crushed. Brown concluded that the wound to his genitals likely had been caused by a hard kick. He also had taken a blow to the chest so severe it had caused lethal damage. He would have bled out in less than 30 seconds.
Damn. And then Yardley gets all the fun things to read, too. So. Torn scrotums. Yay.
All right.
On the official form next to manner of death, Brown wrote homicide. As Detective Apple begins to review the case, things weren't adding up. Unless Greg had been beaten to death elsewhere, his body had been returned to the room and carefully placed on the rug. Nothing about the scene added up to a crime. How does a man get beaten so severely that his ribs crack, inner organs tear, and heart ruptures, all without significant damage to his torso? Other than the bruising and the cut at his crotch, Flanagan's outer body showed no signs of beating. And how could such a rumble have taken place in a hotel room without the thing being toppled or anything disturbed, without anyone in the adjacent rooms hearing a single thing? A group of union electricians staying at the Elegante, a number of whom had been in the room next door, room 349, on the night Greg died.
I don't
They
know.
were in town.
That's my mistake. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. They were in town for an extended stay doing a job for an oil company. At night, they tended to assemble in one another's rooms to drink. What if some of them had been partying next door? Might, ding, the light bulb goes on. Sorry, I don't know if you heard that.
Mhm.
Might one or more of them have knocked on Greg's door and, perhaps drunk and annoyed, exchanged words and then assaulted him in the hallway? Could Greg, badly beaten, have returned to his room and then collapsed? Some of the electricians had been questioned on the day the body was found, but none of them said that they had any interaction with the man in 348. By the end of 2010, Detective Scott Apple was stymied. Hoping to unearth something new, in November, the family had put up a $50,000 reward, but it produced nothing. Michael hired a private detective from Houston, a former FBI agent. Apple met with the man, and reviewed the case. That was the last he saw of him. The matter of Greg Flanagan was bound for the cold files. It would be just another sad box of notes and evidence stored in the Jefferson County Courthouse.
Susie then decided it was time for her husband's case to have a fresh pair of eyes. She contacted Ken Brennan. Brennan is a former Long Island cop and DEA special agent who now makes a good living as a private detective in Florida. His cases, by the way, we could do just a whole show on just his cases that he solved. He's amazing. After hearing about the strange murder mystery, Brennan immediately booked a trip to visit the hotel in Beaumont, Texas. He met up with Detective Apple, who he immediately liked and trusted, and headed to the murder scene. So there is a huge story that Detective Apple tells about meeting Brennan, and they are actually, I think, still really good friends to this day. Like, they became like really super close during this investigation. Deciding to take a look back on the electricians over at 349, they began interviewing their coworkers who were not in the room that night, hoping to catch them answering with new details or protecting their friends if they had caused the death. Most of the men had heard about the man who died in the Elegante Hotel. What a shame. Did anyone know yet what happened to him? All of what these men knew was second or third hand, or worse, was predictably confused. As Brennan would remember it later, one of the crew foremen, a man named Aaron Baroque, had heard something about a gun going off in the boarding house. No, Apple corrected him, that's not the same case. This is the one where a man got in a fight at the Elegante Hotel. Baroque then had heard nothing about that. The detectives immediately went back to the hotel to check on a hunch. In room 348, they began inspecting the floor, the furniture, the walls, everything. They were both working on their hands and knees, shining flashlights under furniture. They found nothing. Brennan was frustrated because he was now convinced that someone had a gun and had been involved. They were about to give up when he noticed an indentation in the wall alongside a closed door that led to the adjoining room. The indentation was a repair job. It appeared to be right where the handle of the door would hit the wall. Typical hotel room wear and tear. But when he swung the door open, the knob and the dent didn't quite match. The doorknob touched the wall slightly to the right. Let's take a look on the other side, Brennan suggested. When they got the hotel's security guy to let them into room 349, there was no mistaking what they found on the wall there.
Brennan stood alongside a small, neat hole in the wall that had been patched with a daub of faintly pink filler that turned out to be dried toothpaste. He measured its height against his hip, then walked back to 348 and measured the indentation. They lined up. A bullet had gone through the wall. The small, neat hole in 349 marked its entry, the larger hole in 348 its exit. Beaumont's crime scene investigators carefully excavated both holes and shined a laser through. The trajectory pointed straight up to the bed where Greg had been sitting, smoking, eating candy, and watching his movie. Brennan said, "This motherfucker was shot." Next, the detectives had to speak with the forensic pathologist, and they were expecting it to be a very difficult conversation. The second detective, Brennan, began explaining what they found. Dr. Brown shot it down. "You're trying to tell me that this man was shot," he said. "I'm telling you he wasn't shot. Since the body had been cremated, there was no way to exhume and re-examine, and the ovens were hot enough to destroy metal fragments." "Listen, Doc," Brennan proposed. "Let's just take out the photos from the autopsy and go through them and see what we can find." Brown humoured them. What about this here?" Brennan asked, indicating a spot of damage. "Yeah, that's the liver." "And what about this here?" "Yes, that's the intestines." Brennan knew what he was looking at. The bullet had entered Greg's scrotum and torn up through him. The skin of the scrotum was soft and pliable, and it had folded over the entry wound, making it less obvious than it was. The internal injuries traced the bullet's fatal trajectory. Brennan asked, "Doc, could all of this damage have been done besides blunt force trauma? Could a bullet cause the same?" "Yes, it could, but that's not what happened here. This man was beaten." Brennan found something in a photo that supported his argument. It looked like a track. "You could get the same thing from being beaten," Brown explained. Then they got to the heart. Brown passed the photo to the detectives. "Doc," Brennan said. "What?" "That's a bullet hole, Doc." Brown took the photo. "What?" Brennan pointed. "That's a fucking bullet hole." Brown explained that sometimes when a man is kicked or hit with a blunt object in the chest, it is the right atrium that normally bursts. "Doc, that's a fucking bullet hole." Brown looked again. "Yeah, that's a bullet hole." After a long moment, he added, "The media is going to kill me on this."
Yeah, well, faced with the evidence, one of the electricians finally talked and revealed what really happened. They'd been drinking beer. Mueller asked Pisano to fetch a bottle of whiskey from his car and also to bring his pistol, a 9mm Ruger. When Pisano returned, Mueller took out his handgun and to the other's alarm, started playing with it. Well, there you go, dumbass. He
Mhm.
pointed it at Steinmetz, who dropped to the floor and cursed at him. And he was pointing it in Pisano's direction at the foot of the bed when it went off. Pisano thought for a second that he had been hit, but then turned to see the hole in the wall behind him. Mueller freaked out, they both said. Mueller bundled up the gun and took it back to his car. When he returned, Pisano had left for his own room, disgusted. Mueller and Steinmetz went downstairs to the bar. The judge gave Mueller 10 years, half of what the law allowed. The apology Mueller offered in court, no matter how sincere, came way too late. Later, Susie stated that she watched Mueller's face as the sentence was pronounced, and that he had looked terribly shocked. That was good, she thought. He's shocked, but not as shocked as my husband was. That night in room 348, relaxing, smoking, watching Iron Man 2, Greg Flanagan could not have known what hit him in the moments before he died. Mueller knew exactly what was hitting him. You have met your match, said the small woman, staring across the courtroom at him, a study in controlled ferocity. I would have to spend the rest of my life tracking you down, and I found you. Greg's murderer. I brought you to justice.
So that's that.
Ugh.
Crazy. I couldn't just tear my eyes away from that story. Talk about, I mean, just from one thing to another. It starts out natural causes, then it's a murder and he got crushed or beaten, and then he was actually shot. And wow, what a freaking roller coaster, man.
It is. I'm glad they got justice, but man, that sucks too.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that guy thought laying on bed and all of a sudden I mean, how does that work? So anyway, well, that's the end of some fun, crazy autopsy stories that we could read some gross ones. I don't know if y'all really want to hear anything like that. We got a
we do
couple of
poop
minutes.
stories. What are we really going to...
All right, I'll read one. Let me look here really quick. Let's see. Oh, this is a scrotum one. We won't talk anymore about scrotums because I'm like, we've had enough of vaginas and scrotums. Here's one. All right. I asked a coworker who used to work as a coroner's assistant a similar question. This is talking about, hey, what's the craziest shit you've ever seen? He said that one time they were called outside to a suicide of an elderly man who lived alone and was sort of a recluse. While cutting out his organs, he came across an 18-inch wooden dildo. Apparently, the poor old man let the dildo get away from him, and instead of going through the embarrassment of getting it removed, he decided to just off himself in his front yard. Poor guy. I mean, come on. That's so bad. Get it fucking removed.
No, just take the fucking L.
No kidding.
You ain't gotta die. That's crazy. I mean, Moni, you take the L on that one?
Yeah. I mean, and medical professionals aren't supposed to share your shit, so why not? Although every time you go to the doctor, the nurse is going to be like, "You came in with this."
Here's a pretty gross one. This guy's talking about. There was this older 400-pound woman who passed away in her house. It was wintertime, and she didn't have many friends or family, so her body remained undiscovered for 2 weeks. Aww. She passed away on the couch, which was directly over a heater. When they went to remove her, she split right in half long ways.
That's some CSI shit there, too, for sure.
And everybody starts going into detail because there's a lot of people on here who are contributing to stories that, and they were all like, because somebody got on there was like, that's not possible. And then you get all these people on there going, actually, it is possible. And here's how it happens. And they're like, okay, cool. I don't need to know anymore.
Back in town.
Oh, Lord. It's like when you speak, be careful for what you say. You're going to get stuff you never really wanted to hear about when you have to give the details. Let me see. Here we go. So this person's telling a couple of quick ones. Weirdest, scariest case, house fire. One body recovered after 1 hour of burning. Body was completely charbroiled, rigid limbs curled up against the torso. We x-rayed the chest, abdomen, and head to see if there's anything of interest before dissection. Metal fragments in the chest. So they do an autopsy. The internal organs are largely intact despite the significant heat damage to the skin and soft tissue. There is a large hematoma in the chest. There's about 2 centimeters of jagged opening in the posterior wall, right ventricle, and the left lateral wall of the ventricle. So they're getting real doctory up in here. Metal fragments embedded in the left lung, tracing backwards from the heart path. Of course, they find it's a bullet wound. So they just say, okay, he was shot before the house caught on fire. So the detectives arrive and they say they've got the homeowner roommate in custody. They're interrogating him right now. He owns a gun. He's been having frequent noisy arguments with the dead guy tenant and have been observed by neighbors and reported to the police. He was away from the home when the fire was happening, claims no knowledge of any of this, and has no idea what happened. Detective high-five each other when we tell them he's been shot and it's definitely homicide. We find out later, after they fully interrogate the homeowner, he confesses to shooting the roommate in the back while he was sleeping and then torching his own house to try to hide the evidence. The roommate was actually his tenant and he wouldn't move out, so he killed him instead.
Oh, geez.
You burn the house down though, so I don't know how that's a win for you, but whatever.
Yeah, right.
If you search, there's a lot of stories like this online. If you search craziest autopsy stories, there's millions of them. I've read so many while eating flank steak, by the way. Proud of myself. So there's a lot of them you guys can check out, and you can save your own fucked up curiosity like me. So
there you go.
With that, we're reached the end of our show, and I would like to ask you guys to please subscribe, rate, and review our show if you like it. If you don't have anything nice to say, I'd appreciate it if you didn't. We always appreciate reviews and shout outs, so that's kind of what it's about. And also, if you guys have any ideas of topics that you want to hear about, we're always open, and we've done that before. We've taken in topics and formed some shows around them. So give us a shout out on one of our social medias or our Facebook page to submit your ideas. And with that, Moni, you want to give us your social medias?
Sure. I am at Rebel Moni, Mony, on Twitter, and Moni, Moni, Bear, Barre, on Instagram.
Yardley?
And you can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker.
I am on Instagram at Creepin@Christy, and then I'm also on our Twitter page at Creepin_it. And Yardley, it's your turn next week. Do you make a decision on what we're going to do?
Yeah, we're going to do the spoiler review for It Chapter 2 because that is releasing very soon. It seems like all of us are excited. Have y'all read any of the little light reviews that they've had for it yet?
I haven't.
It's been pretty mixed.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of things.
Yeah, but I'm excited for it. I mean, I think it's close to a 3-hour movie, so we'll see how they're going to deal with that, but we'll get some closure for the Losers Club.
Heck yeah.
Awesome. Well, as always, folks, thanks for joining, and thank you to my hosts with the boasts. And good luck on your story hour, Moni. I think we probably talk again before it happens, but just one more quick reminder.
I don't think another episode will drop, though, so yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We're excited.
Awesome. And as always, everybody, creep it real.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. And I got thrown on half my words. I've got thrown on half my words. You're the dummy that don't believe.